Ladies and gentlemen, we must now unfortunately interrupt this wonderful music because we want to welcome you all to today's Irish Studies Würzburg Kick-Off Event. I'm quite overwhelmed by this large number of participants. Magnificence, dear newly elected President of Julius Maximilians Universität, Professor Dr. Pauli. Spectabilis, dear Professor Dr. Baumhauer, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, a very special welcome to both of you. A very warm welcome to Dr. Nicholas O'Brien, the Irish Ambassador, to Christian Schuchardt, the Lord Mayor of our beautiful city of Würzburg, and last but definitely not least, to our colleague, Professor Dr. Katharina Rennhak, President of EFACIS.
We are also very pleased to welcome Matthias Fleckenstein, the chairman of the German-Irish Association of Würzburg. And we are extremely pleased to welcome the two Northern Irish authors, Colette Price and John Carson, to our special event today. We are very excited about your readings tonight and the follow-up discussion, which will be moderated by Professor Rennhak from the University of Wuppertal. We also welcome our two keynote lecturers, Dr. Damian Bracken from the History Department of the University College Cork, as well as Professor Dr. Jochen Achilles, Emeritus Professor of American Studies at the University of Würzburg and Adjunct Professor at the University of Mainz. Both have agreed to share their expertise in Irish studies with us today. We are very much looking forward to your keynote talks later. Ladies and gentlemen, dear German and Irish colleagues, dear students, we are more than happy to welcome you all to our kickoff event on today's 150th birthday of the Irish playwright John Millington Synge, who spent 6 months in Würzburg in 1894 and also studied here. You will hear more about that later from Professor Achilles. But the connections between Würzburg and Ireland go even further back than that. The Irish monks Cillian, Colonat, and Totnan proselytized Franconia around 686 AD. Dr. Bracken will later touch upon this earlier area of Irish Franconian connections. And we can say today, Würzburg is considered the Irish city on the continent.
Yes, and hence it stands to reason that the University of Würzburg is engaged in the study of literature, language, history and culture of the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Irish diaspora. For us, it was out of real interest and because of our own experiences that we came up with the idea for Irish Studies Würzburg. Over many private as well as professional visits to Ireland, both Ina Bergmann and myself developed a strong personal and professional interest in Irish studies. It makes us all the more stunned and very sad, of course, to hear about the violence in Northern Ireland, people rioting in towns and cities almost nightly since the end of March. We really hope that this will end soon. Well, many of you know Ina Bergmann, who is a researcher and lecturer at the Chair of American Studies, and for my part, I am head of the Teaching English as a Foreign Language, and one of my research areas is the teaching of Irish culture in English classes. This means I'm exploring why Irish studies in the EFA classes, what to teach, and how to implement it in schools. Through the contact with Ina Bergmann and the student excursion to Ireland we both carried out together in 2017, the basis for the founding of the ISWÜ was set. Our major goal in this research cooperation was to bring together various departments of our university which deal with Irish literature, language, history and culture. We were very pleased with the visit of the Irish ambassador, Dr. Nicholas O'Brien, last summer, and since then we have been able to attract many ISWÜ members. The Forum is an inter-faculty association which combines teaching and research in Irish studies. It is very interdisciplinary and consists of researchers from Anglophone studies, historians, theologians, and many more. Next to all our academic university members, we have cooperations with CELT, the Free Digital Humanities Resource for Irish Study at UCC, with our JMU Writing Center, with the German Irish Society Würzburg, with lecturers from the Center for Languages, and also teachers at schools from around Würzburg, and since the visit of Dr. Nicholas O'Brien to ISWÜ, also with the Irish Embassy in Berlin.
Irish Studies Würzburg is a corporation under the umbrella of the European Federation of Associations and Centres of Irish Studies, EFACIS, which unites the major national professional associations in the field of Irish studies, as well as about 50 academic centres in over 25 European countries. ISWÜ offers opportunities for cooperation and international dialogue to scholars, PhD students, students of English, non-academic circles, and simply all those interested in Irish issues. Although today marks what we call the kick-off of Irish Studies Würzburg, we have already organized a couple of events in the recent past. Apart from our seminars with a focus on Ireland and the Irish-American diaspora, we had guest lectures and extracurricular activities during the winter term 2021. For example, in November, when Dr. Hiram Morgan, Beatrix Färber, and Dr. Damian Bracken of the University College Cork introduced us to CELT, the free digital humanities resource for Irish history, literature, and politics. Or in December, when Dr. Tara Stubbs from the University of Oxford gave a lecture on Irish literature, American culture, and Hiberno-American blandness. And also in December, when Professor Susanne Mohr from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim and Katrin Renkwitz from the University of Bonn focused on Irish Sign Language and Irish English in multimodal perspective. We have also recorded a JMU podcast on Ireland, St. Patrick's Day, and Irish Studies, which you can listen to on our website.
Well, and what are our future goals? First of all, they include the active treatment of Irish studies in teaching, but also, of course, further excursions and external teaching assignments. We also want to intensify already existing research by further networking, by developing future national and international research projects, and, if possible, an application for an interdisciplinary research class on Irish studies at the Graduate School for the Humanities at the JMU. We also plan a rotating guest professorship in Irish studies in cooperation with the Irish Embassy, EFACIS, and the universities of Wuppertal, Tübingen, and Saarland. It goes without saying that we will have more author readings within the frameworks of EFACIS Irish itinerary, and we will participate in a project on great Irish novels of the 21st century with our own contributions and by hosting guest lectures by European Irish Studies scholars. In the long term, we aim at an application for a DFG research training group and or an international research group, for instance, an Erasmus cooperation. And actually, first contacts from our university have already been established with researchers at various Irish and other European universities with a focus on Irish studies. There is Trinity College Dublin, but also University College Dublin, National University of Galway, University College Cork, University of Limerick, and also Irish College Leuven in Belgium. We are very honored that some of the colleagues from these Irish studies hubs and all other corporations have joined us today.
Before we finally start with our program, we would like to thank our two hardworking teaching assistants, Michelle Zirkel and Antonius Menaios, our pragmatic assistants, Karin Körnehen and Eva Hedrich, our website wizard, Alexander Hemmerich, the entire ISWÜ team, and of course, we would also like to thank the band consisting of Ella Zlotos, Georg, Zobel, and Nick Jira for the wonderful musical setting. We are looking forward to the gig during the musical break. Thank you again to everyone who will actively participate in this event today, who made and makes it possible behind the scenes. And also thank you to all of you, the attendees, for your interest in Irish Studies Würzburg. As Maria already said, we are really overwhelmed by the interest. Last but not least, we absolutely want to thank the Dean's Office of the Faculty of Arts for their financial support, which this event would have not been possible. And we also want to thank the WÜ Global Initiative, headed by Professor Mary Ann Snyder-Kerber, for the support we get for this event as well. Also, although it is a pity that we can only meet virtually, we nevertheless wish you a wonderful, enjoyable afternoon, evening here with us at the JMU. We would now like to ask the speakers to give their greetings in the order in which they appear on the program. And we start out with Professor Pauli, the newly elected president of our university. Magnificence, please give us your greeting.
We cannot hear you. Maybe we can listen to the dean's greeting while they're working on the technical problem.
Yes, so we'll now hear the greeting by Professor Baumhauer, the Dean of the Faculty of Arts.
Gentlemen, dear guests, as Dean of the Faculty of Arts, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the digital kick-off event of the Würzburg Irish Studies. Please let me thank each of you for your digital presence at this opening event at our university today. I'm especially delighted, and I think it also expresses the quality of the modern languages at our university, that so many colleagues of universities and institutions have made it possible to attend this kick-off event today. The University of Würzburg, as well as our faculty, is honored by your attendance and by the decision to let the Irish Studies take place at our alma mater. Although our university is engaged in the study of the literature, language, history and culture of the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Irish diaspora for quite some time, the today starting cooperation of the Irish Studies Würzburg under the umbrella of the European Federation of Associations and Centres of Irish Studies adds a new dimension. The Irish Studies of Würzburg offers opportunities for cooperation and international dialogue to scholars, PhD students, students of English, non-academic circles and all those interested in Irish issues. And the organization of cultural events such as the Irish Itinerary as well. Meine Damen und Herren, die Irish Studies sind ein weiteres Beispiel dafür, dass sich Wissenschaft und eben auch die häufig dafür gescholtenen Geisteswissenschaften nicht in den Elfenbeinturm zurückziehen, sondern ganz bewusst in die sie umgebende Welt hineinwirken, aus der sie letztendlich auch ihre Forschungsgegenstände beziehen. Bei den Irish Studies kommt noch hinzu, dass damit quasi nebenbei die langjährige aktive Partnerschaft zwischen der irischen Stadt Bray, dem County Wicklow und der Stadt Würzburg auch an der JMU zum Ausdruck kommt. Meine Damen und Herren, Wissenschaft und Forschung kosten Geld. Insbesondere die Geisteswissenschaften unterliegen dabei einem besonderen permanenten Rechtfertigungsdruck. Zwar werden sie einerseits und insbesondere vor dem Hintergrund der sich ständig beschleunigenden Entwicklungen in nahezu allen Lebensbereichen für unverzichtbar gehalten, so soll sie nicht zuletzt den Vertrautheits- und Sinnbedarf der Menschen erfüllen und damit Orientierung geben. Andererseits zeigen Äußerungen, die die Geisteswissenschaftler einst als den Adel der Nutzlosen oder etwas aktueller vom ehemaligen Vorsitzenden des Wissenschaftsrates Dieter Simon als schillernde Mischung aus Hofnarr, Cassandra und Bettelmönch bezeichnen, dass, nehme man diese Äußerungen tatsächlich ernst, es geradezu unverantwortlich wäre, würde die Universität Würzburg an ihrem exzellenten geisteswissenschaftlichen Profil, das sie unbestritten hat, auch weiterhin festhalten. Meine Damen und Herren, wir müssen nicht nur auch weiterhin an diesem Profil festhalten, sondern es mit noch erheblich schärferen Konturen versehen, und dazu können solche Einrichtungen wie die Irish Studies beitragen. Denn es ist eben nicht so, wie Bertolt Brecht einen seiner Protagonisten feststellen lässt: Ich habe bemerkt, dass wir viele abschrecken von unserer Lehre dadurch, dass wir auf alles eine Antwort wissen. Und ihn die Frage anschließen ließ: Können wir nicht eine Liste der Fragen aufstellen, die uns ganz ungelöst erscheinen? Meine Damen und Herren, genau dieses kann und soll doch eine der Aufgaben der Irish Studies sein. Ladies and gentlemen, the local organization has been working hard to organize this event. Many thanks to them. A special thank goes to Maria Eisenmann and Ina Bergmann, the founders of the entire project and organizer of the today event as well. I would like to wish you diverse and numerous ideas and productive discussions. So an institution that leads to new knowledge and ideas and contacts as well. And I hope that after the pandemics, you all will have the opportunity to a pleasant stay at our university, in our town, and the lovely region of Lower Franconia. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Spectabilis, for this pre-recorded greeting. And I have the feeling we can go back to the president's office now. And Magnificence, please give us your greeting.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, very well.
Sorry for the problem, but it's managed now, and thank you to my collaborators here. So Your Excellency, Dr. O'Brien, Lord Mayor Schuchardt, Professor Rennhak, Professor Baumhauer, Professor Bergmann, Professor Eisenmann, Mr. Fleckenstein, dear guests from Ireland and Germany, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Julius Maximilians University Würzburg, JMU for short, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, especially to our guests from Ireland. I am delighted that you could follow our invitation to today's kick-off event of the research cooperation Irish Studies Würzburg. I am genuinely honored to welcome the Irish ambassador to Germany this afternoon, Dr. O'Brien. Dear Mr. Ambassador, you are joining us from Berlin, and I would like to thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. For those who are not familiar with our university, let me give you a brief overview of the historical background, the scientific tradition, as well as the present state of GMU. The roots of our university reach back as far as 1402, which makes it the oldest university in the state of Bavaria. During its history, University of Würzburg has been selected by an impressive number of internationally leading scientists. So far, 14 Nobel laureates have worked for some part of their career at our university. In this context, special mention should be made of Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. Röntgen was awarded the first Nobel Prize in Physics for the discovery of the X-rays here in Würzburg in 1895, an event which has had the greatest impact worldwide in many fields of science and areas of application ever since, and that will continue to have an impact far into the future. In 2020, we celebrated the 125th anniversary and also the 175th birth anniversary of the discovery of the X-rays Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. Today, our university, the University of Würzburg, comprises 10 faculties with 440 professors and more than 28,000 students in a wide range of subjects and degree programs. We maintain partnerships with over 300 universities worldwide and participate in international and internationally oriented networks, including the Coimbra Group, the Magna Carta Universitatum, and the Transatlantic Science Student Exchange Program. International partnerships play an important role. Academic exchange programs, as well as staff and teaching mobility, provide enormous potential to learn other perspectives. I am thus very happy that the exchange between our university and Irish universities is lively and prosperous. We have, for instance, several Erasmus partnerships with Irish institutions of higher education, including the Trinity College Dublin, the University College Dublin, the National University of Ireland Galway, and the University of Limerick. The highly appreciated cooperation with Ireland constitutes a valuable source of enrichment, not only for science and research at Würzburg University, but also for the friendship between our peoples and countries. Here in Franconia, we have a long history with Ireland. As mentioned before, at the beginning of the Middle Ages, the Irish missionaries have brought Christianity to the Main River area and initiated Christianization. A tangible demonstration of this powerful influence is the fact that some outstanding and prestigious testimonies of Irish history belong to the holdings of our university library. Among the approximately 1,500 manuscripts from the Middle Ages and another 800 from modern times, a masterpiece is St. Kilian's Gospel Book, a parchment manuscript from the 6th century. It is a great honor to be able to say that this manuscript, as the oldest existing testimonia, contributes significantly to the exploration and reconstruction of Old Irish. Dr. O'Brien has already visited us and saw the manuscript collection on the occasion of his stay in Würzburg in June 2020. I am therefore pleased that the research cooperation Irish Study Würzburg maintains this tradition. The research cooperation unites various departments of our university that deal with Irish literature, language, history, and culture. I would like to thank the two founders, Professor Bergmann and Professor Eisenmann, for their initiative, as well as for organizing today's event, together with their team. Thank you very much for your valuable commitment. And my sincere thanks also goes to the Dean's Office of our Faculty of Arts for funding this beautiful event. Today, we can look forward to exciting lectures, music, and readings. I wish all an interesting afternoon and evening, lively discussions, and a fruitful exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Magnificent Professor Pauli, for your greeting. And we'll move on to Dr. O'Brien, the Irish ambassador, for his greeting. Excellency, if you please give us your greeting now.
Thank you very much indeed, and I must say I'm delighted to be here today. And just to say in native Irish, Céimeán Fáilte, you're very welcome. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. So Professor Pauli, Professor Baumhauer, and Lord Mayor Schuchardt, and of course dear Professor Dr. Bergmann and Professor Dr. Eisenmann, and Matthias, our friend, of course, from the German Deutsch-Irish Gesellschaft. And Professor Rennhak, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, just say I'm delighted to see so many people on the call this afternoon. When I was last down in Würzburg, you asked me would I come down in April for the opening, and I said I'd be delighted. And little did we think we'd be looking at a screen in all our own little kind of bedrooms and cubby holes. But unfortunately, that's the world we're in. But you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm really looking forward to getting down to Würzburg very soon, hopefully. You know, as things improve in society. I think today is really an important day for Ireland, an important day for Würzburg. And you know, in a sense, you know, you would kind of say, given the links between Würzburg and Ireland, why is it only happening today? So it's great that it's happening. And I must say, I really want to congratulate Professor Bergmann and Professor Eisenmann in particular. And also congratulations to Professor Pauli, and I greatly look forward to working with you during my many visits to Würzburg in the future. As we say, there are very strong links between Ireland and Würzburg, and you know, as has been said, you know, Würzburg in a sense is the most Irish city on the continent. So it's right and fitting that Irish studies will be promoted and encouraged at the university. And I'm really appreciative of the support of the president, his office, and all the kind of faculty members right across the university. And as Professor Bergmann has said, ever since St. Kilian and his companions came to Würzburg in 686, I suppose the city has always had a certain pull and a real attraction for Ireland. And I suppose these many personal connections between Würzburg and Ireland, the close relationship which St. Kilian laid the foundation for, is so strong today and has really endured over the centuries. And indeed, the significance of Würzburg for German-Irish relations was emphasized by our president, President Michael D. Higgins, during his state visit to Würzburg 2 years ago in July 2019. And in fact, he still speaks very fondly of this today. The permanent Secretary General, the permanent head of the Foreign Ministry, also studied in Würzburg University. He spent a great year down there, but he seems to talk a lot about the pubs rather than the university. But you know, we all have such a wonderful attraction and feeling and fondness for Würzburg. And I think Professor, the president was really impressed by the university's library. And as you mentioned, Professor Pauli, the wonderful manuscripts, and one in particular which dates back to the 7th century, Kilian's Gospel, and that demonstrates the links between Ireland and Würzburg. And as you say, I saw that during my last visit there, and it's wonderfully impressive. And I suppose just the richness from modern scholarship in that, because there's annotations in the margins, and it gives ideas about kind of Irish writing at the time. So taking all of this, I think, into account, it's the most natural thing in the world that we would have Irish studies at the Julius Maximilians Universität, and one of Germany's oldest and most prestigious universities. And relationships between Ireland and Würzburg, and between, I think, between any town or any country, are primarily people-to-people links. Like the town twinning which we have between Würzburg and Bray. We have exchange programs between schools in Würzburg and schools in counties Dublin and Wicklow here in Ireland. And we establish and maintain these connections, and it takes a huge amount of volunteer work, enthusiasm, and commitment. And the initiation of this centre is no exception. So I want to really thank Professor Bergmann and Professor Eisenmann for your commitment and highlight the embassy's gratitude for your work. We're very much working, really looking forward to working with you going forward. And as I said, I'll be down in the centre as soon as I can. And I also want to thank and acknowledge the work and the generosity of our friend Matthias Fleckenstein, who I mentioned, the Deutsche Ihre Gesellschaft, who is also a support to you in the centre. So just before I finish, and as I said at the very beginning, I just want to mention another famous Irishman who spent time in Würzburg. And of course, that's the playwright John Millington Synge. And I think we owe a huge debt to the city of Würzburg, because when he went to Würzburg, he was studying music. And then, of course, he switched to become a writer. I haven't ever heard his piano recitals, but I'm certainly glad that he changed courses. I actually studied one of his plays for the Abitur, the Playboy of the Western World. And I'm very much looking forward to Professor Dr. Achilles talking about this controversial play, The Playboy of the Western World, later this evening, and to celebrate the opening of Irish Studies Würzburg with you today. So I really just want to say I'm delighted. I really look forward to working together, be it visiting professorships, or working together in terms of lectures, guest lectures, whatever it is. So I can assure you of the Embassy's cooperation going forward. And I just want to once again congratulate the university, and in a very special way to thank the two professors for driving this forward. So thank you very much indeed. Und vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Vielen Dank, Your Excellency, for your greeting. And we'll move on now to Mr. Schuchardt, who is the Lord Mayor of Würzburg. It's your turn now. Can we please have your greetings? We can't hear you at the moment.
Yes.
Now.
Dear Ambassador Dr. O'Brien, dear President Pauli, President Rennhak, and Dean Baumhauer, dear Professor Bergmann and Eisenmann, dear Matthias Fleckenstein, ladies and gentlemen. It's with great pleasure that I can join you today as we celebrate the beginning of the Irish Studies program at the Julius Maximilians University in Würzburg. As already mentioned, Würzburg is often referred to as the Irish city of the continent. Consequently, this makes me perhaps the southernmost Irish mayor in the world, a title I am of course very proud of. And indeed, Würzburg and Ireland share a very special bond. It may not always be apparent on first glance, but if you take a stroll through Würzburg, you will come by many monuments and places that boast of these links to Ireland. Our cathedral is St. Kilian's Cathedral, named after our city patron, St. Kilian, the Irish monk who came to Würzburg 1,300 years ago. In July, we celebrate his name day with the Kiliani Festival in normal use. We have Irish pubs and stores that sell Irish whiskey. And when I look out of my office window in the town hall, I can almost spot the statues of Kilian, Colonnade, and Tottenham on the Alte Mainbrücke as they watch over our citizens and tourists as they walk over the bridge or enjoy their Brückenshoppen, even in Corona times. If we stroll even further towards the fortress and through the grounds of the former Landesgartenschaugelände, the Federal States Gardening Show from 1990, we passed by the Wicklow Garden, a tiny bit of Ireland dedicated to Würzburg's sister, Bray and County Wicklow, and to Glendalough somehow. This partnership with the city and county on the east coast of Ireland, close to Dublin, was founded in 1999. And guess who played a major role in it? Kilian once again. Back in the late 1990s, a local school's headmaster in Bray wanted to rename his school after an Irish saint, and so came across Kilian. During his research, he found out that Kilian is also the city patron of Würzburg, and so the headmaster got in contact with the Rotary Club Würzburg. They put him in touch with the Matthias Grünewald Gymnasium, and thus the first school partnership between Würzburg and Bray was established. Further initiatives from the Deutsche Irische Gesellschaft, German-Irish Society in Würzburg, eventually lead to the founding of the partnership with Bray and Würzburg. Since Bray at the time only had around 20,000 inhabitants. The partnership was extended to the surrounding County Wicklow with its roughly 120,000 inhabitants to match the size of Würzburg. In yet another way, this makes the partnership a special one amongst Würzburg's 13 sister cities. After the past decades, the partnership has been filled with life by many participants, both in Würzburg and in Bray and in County Wicklow. There are student exchanges and regular visits between our two cities. In 2019, we celebrated the 20th anniversary of this relationship during our visit to Bray and County Wicklow. 41 citizens from Würzburg traveled to Bray together and enjoyed 5 wonderful days with our Irish friends, and we had even more potential participants on the waiting list. So after all, I think we can all agree that given the rich Irish history in Würzburg and the many links between the universities, schools, and citizens, the founding of the Irish Studies program was only the next logical step. I'm very happy to be able to join in the celebrations today, and I'm sure that this course will not only contribute to the university's varied program, but also highlight the importance of the Irish-German relations for the city of Würzburg. It's great to see and hear how many people and institutions from within the university, as well as without, are involved in filling the Irish Studies Würzburg with life. I think it's particularly remarkable that the program doesn't only aim at university students, but some events and lectures are also open to the public. I want to take the opportunity to express my gratitude to everyone involved in the Irish Studies program, particularly to Dr. Bergmann, Dr. Eisenmann for bringing all the different parties together and kickstarting this idea. I'm wishing all the lecturers, guest speakers, students, and other participants every possible success, and I'm looking forward to seeing the Irish Studies Würzburg flourish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your greeting, Lord Mayor Schuchardt. Our next speaker, or shall I say collaborator, is Matthias Fleckenstein, the chairman of the German-Irish Association of Würzburg. It's your turn.
Thank you. When the Irish monks Cillian and his companions came to Würzburg in the late 7th century and were killed a few years later, it didn't look like the start of a love affair between Würzburg and Ireland. Maybe more like a plot of jealousy and violence for a drama series like Game of Thrones. Who knows? But in fact, it was the first recorded contact between our two countries, Germany and Ireland. And for more than 1300 years now, up to the present day, the relations between Würzburg and Ireland have never been cut off. Thomas Cardinal O'Fee spoke about 3 waves of Irish Christianization on the continent, and all of them reached Würzburg, from the Irish pioneers of the 7th and 8th centuries to the Irish scholars, and later the Irish Benedictines who founded St. James's Abbey in Würzburg, an important stopover for Irish pilgrims on their way to Rome or the Holy Land. Some of the oldest existing records of written Irish in the so-called Libri Sancti Kiliani, previously owned by Irish scholars and later given to the Cathedral Library, are now kept in the University Library, and until today, they are regarded as important sources of Irish identity, worth a visit, for example, by Irish presidents Mary McAleese in 2008 and Michael D. Higgins in 2019. More recently than the Irish monks, John Millington Synge stayed here for a few months in 1894 and studied at the Royal School of Music, which is now the University of Music. His short stay was an important turning point in Synge's life. It was here that he realized that his talent as a composer was only average, and his stage fright as a performing musician could not be overcome. But as we all know, in the end, his disappointment led to a new orientation towards literature instead of music. Today is John Millington Synge's 150th birthday, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to celebrate. In our time, Würzburg has a number of close contacts with Ireland. The very active twinning between Bray and County Wicklow and Würzburg, established in 1999, 4 exchange programs so far between schools in Würzburg and Ireland, the oldest one dating back to 1983, Matthias Grünewald Gymnasium, church contacts between Molla in County Cavan, the home of St. Killian, and not to forget, the German-Irish Association, which was founded in 1986. But besides the old Irish manuscripts, is there also an Irish link at the university, you might wonder? And in fact, from 1955 to 1973, Würzburg University already had an Institut für Keltologie und Irlandkunde, an Institute for Celtic and Irish Studies. You will hardly find anyone still remembering this, but now, nearly 50 years later, Maria Eisenmann and Ina Bergmann had the brilliant idea of founding ISWÜ, Irish Studies Würzburg, to bring Ireland back on Würzburg's academic map. Together with a growing number of enthusiastic supporters from different faculties and institutions, this has already become a wonderful cooperation project. And I'm sure that ISWÜ will provide a lasting Irish contribution to the academic calendar of Würzburg University and beyond. Today is the official kickoff, but Irish studies at Würzburg University are already in full swing. And on behalf of the German-Irish Association of Würzburg, I would like to wish ISWÜ a bright and successful future, and thank everybody who joined in to make this wonderful Irish dream come true, especially, of course, Maria Eisenmann and Ina Bergmann. I'm delighted to say that ISWÜ gives us another reason to call Würzburg the Irish town on the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias Fleckenstein, for your greetings. And last but not least, please give us your greetings, Professor Katharina Rennhak, President of EFACIS.
Dear Professor Pauli, dear Professor Baumhauer, dear Ambassador O'Brien, dear Lord Mayor Schuchardt, dear Mr. Fleckenstein, dear Professor Bergmann, dear Professor Eisenmann. It is a great honor for me personally, and more importantly for me as a representative of EFACIS, the European Federation of Associations and Centers of Irish Studies, to speak at this occasion and after so many illustrious speakers. In preparation for this event, I have delved a bit into the newspaper archives, and well, you will not be surprised to hear that my research into some forgotten connections between Ireland and Würzburg, guided by the question of how they contributed to strengthen European ties, yielded numerous very interesting results. Here are just 3 examples. In times of a global pandemic, when European nations feel the urge for concerted efforts, I was happy to find an article entitled "Influenza Still on the Increase, Outbreak in Belfast," which was published in the Weekly Irish Times on January the 4th in 1890. This article makes it quite clear that even 130 years ago, the Irish media regarded an influenza as a European problem, and of course gave special attention to what happened in Würzburg. After a paragraph which quotes Dr. Hugh Lewis of Schenkel Road on cases in Belfast and which details how, quote, the medical men in Ireland more generally have been preparing for the epidemic by procuring large supplies of spirits of quinine and other remedies, the journalist turns to Germany, stating that, quote, private telegrams received here announced that in consequence of the great increase in the number of cases of influenza at Würzburg, it has been found necessary to erect temporary hospitals for the reception of patients. End of quote. In short, then as now, Belfast and Würzburg, Ireland and Germany, saw themselves as part of a larger community which shared certain grievances and worked towards a better future together. I am glad to say that, of course, it wasn't always only more or less global catastrophes that brought Ireland and Würzburg more closely together. Ireland has also always carefully monitored alarming developments in the Würzburg Christian community. In an article of the Irish Times published in July 1875, we hear the great relief of the author, who reports that, quote, the Würzburg papers announce that Herr Hohn, a member of the cathedral chapter of that town, has been called to account by his clerical superiors in Würzburg for the liberal opinions which he expressed during the recent elections. As you can see in our mission statement, EFACIS is dedicated to assisting those interested in Irish studies across the many disciplines that are now relevant to this area. And thus, I was particularly delighted to find an article in the Weekly Irish Times of September 1879, which presents a little adventure story that reflects the intersection of recent technological achievements in the field of public transport and sports. We here learn that a Bavarian student, quote, laid a wager that he would journey upon a bicycle from Würzburg to Kaiserslautern more quickly than the train. And then the article relishes in narrating the Würzburg athlete's adventure in detail. To turn to more recent adventures, I first got an inkling of the fact that there was hope that Würzburg University was starting new initiatives to continue its long tradition in Irish studies when, on our way back from the EFACIS conference in Ljubljana in 2019, Amy Waha, which I think is also here a member of EFACIS and the German-Irish Association of Würzburg, the two of us found ourselves sitting next to each other, not on a tandem bicycle, but on a bus that was supposed to be quicker than the train from Ljubljana to Villach, from where we would eventually return home to Bavaria. And she told me about those very recent initiatives. I'm truly delighted that less than 2 years later, we all meet here for this fabulous kick-off event, which from the perspective of EFACIS is a very important step towards bringing academic Irish studies back on the map of German academia and integrating German scholars into the fold of other European Irish Centres activities. I look very much forward to cooperating with you in the future and heartily congratulate you on your achievements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katharina Rennhak, and thank you all very much for the wonderful and very warm and also very individual greetings, which we are very happy about. Now, it is a great honor for me to introduce our first guest lecturer, Dr. Damian Bracken from UCC, to you today. In his PhD, completed already in 1994, Damian Bracken examined Latin and Latin-influenced elements of early Irish vernacular law. His research has focused on Hiberno-Latin literature, especially on the works of St. Columbanus, the earliest Irish writer to leave an identifiable corpus of writings, and the first to explore Irish identity. Dr. Damian Bracken is interested particularly in exploring Columbanus' works in the context of late antique and early medieval ideals of authority and concepts of orthodoxy. He has taught in the School of History at University College Cork and spent periods teaching in the Department of History, Boston University, and in the Department of History, Boston College, where he held the Brian P. Burns Chair in Irish Studies. Damian, we are more than happy to have you here as our guest speaker today and are now all looking forward to your lecture entitled Light from the West, Early Irish Learning and the Southern Germanic Lands. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wonder, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'll try to share the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And my skills with Zoom are pretty hit and miss. So I don't know if you're able to see.
That's perfect. We see your picture and your screen.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, I'll begin by giving my heartiest congratulations to Professor Ina Bergmann and Professor Maria Eisenmann on the establishment, or as we've just heard, the re-establishment of Irish studies at the University of Würzburg. And this is a very welcome development because Germany is where Irish studies began as an academic discipline. And I'm also very grateful to Ina and Maria for asking me to talk at this event because of the very ancient contacts between Würzburg and the part of Ireland where I live. And I'm not going to go into those contacts in any great detail today because what I want to do is to look at the earliest Irish identity in literature, how the Irish saw themselves, and also how others saw the Irish. And this involves issues of race and identity, which we've just heard are as much hot topics today as there ever were in the past. The links between Ireland and Würzburg go back by tradition to the time of St. Killian, and also to the 12th century, to the time of Christianus MacCorhig, the abbot of St. James, the Schottenkloster in Regensburg. And I should point out that Schottenkloster means Irish abbey, not Scottish, Irish. Okay, and in his period also saw the foundation of the Schottenkloster in Würzburg in Germany. And from the 12th century, Würzburg, Schottenkloster had associations with this part of the world because the 12th century saw the foundation of a priory here in Rosscarbery in West Cork. And that priory was essentially a recruiting station for rounding up young Irish men and posting them off to Würzburg to become monks in the Schottenkloster there. The Schottenkloster existed until about the end of the 15th century. They did not have what we would now call a sustainable model for continuation. The numbers were low, they always were low, and by the end of the 15th century, the numbers were running out. And the Irish monasteries were asked to accept among their number German monks into these monastic foundations. One of the rulers of the Schottenkloster, Thomas, who was abbot of the Schottenkloster in Vienna at the end of the 15th century, retired and moved to Würzburg. But what you have here is an extract from an account of the developments of the 15th century, when the Irish monasteries were requested and eventually forced to accept German monks. This section here reads the Irish reaction to this insistence. It says, non possumus nec volumus commemorare monachis aliarum quam nostrarum nationem, qui nos interfeceremus eos vel interfeceremur ab eis. It means we cannot and we are not willing to live with monks of any other nation than our own, because we, the Irish monks, will either kill them, the Germans, or we will be killed by them. So whatever the legacy of the Irish Foundation at Würzburg, racial harmony, at least in the short term, wasn't one of those legacy elements. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to look at this, the issue of race, of racial identity, with reference to the historical links between Ireland and the southern Germanic lands. In the ancient world, this is how people saw the ancient world. This is how it was configured. This is very much a rationalization of the world as people understood it throughout much of the Middle Ages. And what you see here, not surprisingly, is Jerusalem at the very center of the world. So here, X, or the cross, marks the spot at the center. This is Jerusalem. And the continents of the world are at least the ones that were known at this stage, are ranged around it. Here you have Europe. And I wonder if you can see the cursor as I move it around that map. Okay, you could. So here you have Europe, here you have Africa, and here you have Asia. And this great landmass of Europe, Asia, and Africa is surrounded by this all-encircling ocean, the ocean described in the Bible and described by the ancient geographers. And to find Ireland on that map is not an easy task, because at the very edge, at the extreme edge of that map, you have the island of Britannia. This is Britain, literally at the end of the map. And beyond Britannia is the island of Hibernia. This is Ireland, which is perceived to be so utterly remote that it is quite literally, it is off the map. And this really shaped views of the people of the islands in the ancient world, because the cities of the empire, of the Roman Empire, and what followed on afterwards, these were the places where the norms of civilized living were defined and maintained. Therefore, if you live far from these cities, you live far from civilization, until you get to this island, this tiny island, off the map, which is literally off the map, and it is the furthest point from civilization. So therefore, on this island, this is the island of Thule, by the way, just beyond Ireland, which was believed to be uninhabitable. So nobody lives there. So this does not figure in these ancient taxonomies of the peoples and of the earth. And these geographic views shaped perceptions of the people who lived in these islands. Here is a pretty typical view of the inhabitants of Britain and Ireland from a writer who calls himself Ithacus Ister. And he's writing perhaps in the 9th century. And this is how he describes Britain. He says, Britain is a place where the people are wholly unskilled and coarseness abounded. The British Isles would be better named the Brutish Isles. So for this writer, this continental writer, the British are brutish. And not surprisingly, he left it quickly and he hastened on to Ireland and remained there for some time, poring over their books. And he called them idiomachi and idiotiste, that is, unskilled workers and ignorant teachers. Regarding these books as worthless, he says, to come to the end of the world and arrive in Ireland is a burdensome task without profit. He lashed out at their great uncouthness. And that's a very interesting, perception of Ireland and of Irish learning. First of all, it's interesting that he should associate in the 9th century the Irish with books. And you could say that, it takes, barbarians or not, it takes a certain level of cultural sophistication to be able to produce books. You could even argue that it requires an even higher level of cultural sophistication to be able to produce and support the production of bad books. But this is what the Irish are doing from this fellow's perception. So I want to look at these ideas and how early Irish missionaries on the continent in the early historical period confronted, challenged, and ultimately subverted these perceptions of the inhabitants of Ireland. And this is Columbanus. This is Ireland's first known literatus, first known literateur, Ireland's first man of letters, the first Irish person to leave behind a literary corpus, the first Irish writer to explore Irish identity, what it means to be Irish. When Columbanus writes about the geographic remoteness of the island of Ireland, he links Ireland paradoxically with orthodoxy, with the true faith. He challenges the ancient and deeply entrenched perceptions of people living on the geographical periphery, who are considered to be cut off from the mainstream and living in cultural isolation. And what he does when he talks about the Irish and Irish identity is he shapes and reshapes that identity based on his own life experience and on his religious beliefs. And he presents an identity which accommodates diversity, an identity that does not reject people because they are perceived to be barbarians. And in this context, this is where Würzburg has an essential role to play in the promotion of this type of research. Because Würzburg preserves some of the earliest articulations and products of Irish identity. This is the Codex Paulinus Würzburgensis, preserved in the University Library in Würzburg, which is digitized and is now available online. It's the text of the letters ascribed to St. Paul in the New Testament, but with thousands of glosses, with thousands of notes. And many of these notes are written in Old Irish, written in the vernacular. And books like the Würzburg St. Paul allow us to reconstruct the language of early medieval Ireland, of Old Irish. A book which I'm particularly interested in is this. It's the Gospel of St. Matthew, a manuscript written in Ireland. And as you can see, it's not a very spectacular medieval manuscript, especially compared to the great insular codices like the Book of Kells or the Lindisfarne Gospels. That's because this book was intended as a teaching text. The text of the Gospels, as you can see it here, is presented in a way to allow interlinear notes, glosses between the lines of the text, explaining the text. And this is evidence of early Irish writing and the role of the University of Würzburg in giving online access to this book is a real service to scholarship. It's an interesting book because it contains a series of parchment slips, schedulae, and these have been stitched into the binding, some 30 in all. This particular one is fascinating. It reads, Mohinu or Mosinu Mokumin, and this is a pet name for a figure better known in history as Sinlon or Silon. The scholar and abbot of Bangor was the first of the Irish who learned the computus, that is the technique for calculating Easter Sunday, by heart from a certain learned Greek. Afterwards, Mochurog Mokuneth Shimon, whom the Romans styled the doctor of the whole world and a pupil of the aforesaid scholar in the island called Cronach in Downpatrick, committed this knowledge to writing lest it should fade from memory. Now, the second named figure here, Mochurog, has associations with this part of the world, with County Waterford. And a church is dedicated to him, a historical church is dedicated to him in this town in East Cork in Youghal. A more famous pupil, however, of Sinlon or Sinilus of Bangor is the figure I mentioned earlier on, St. Columbanus. So this tiny piece, this fragment of a manuscript preserved in Würzburg allows us to extend our knowledge of Irish teaching beyond Columbanus, allows us to say something about the world of learning that he emerged from. And this is a trajectory of Columbanus's career. Columbanus is born in Leinster in about the year 543, and he emerges in the 590s as the head teacher of the great northern monastery of Bangor, near present-day Belfast. And in about the year 590 or 591, when Columbanus is in his 50s and he's secure, he can look forward to a very comfortable retirement. What Columbanus decides to do instead is he packs his bags and he heads off to the continent. So in a state of midlife crisis, when he was maybe slightly menopausal, he headed off to the continent in his 50s. He left the familiar behind and he journeys down through continental Europe, establishing an important series of monasteries in the Vosges, principal of which was Luxeuil, and eventually his last foundation is Bobbio in northern Italy. And this is an extraordinary map showing the posthumous impact of Columbanus's career. There are some 115 monastic establishments which have either been founded directly by Columbanus or by the graduates, the alumni of his monasteries, or these are monasteries which adapt and adopt aspects of Columbanus's monastic rule. And that is a really dramatic map showing the cultural and the spiritual influence of Columbanus. And what Columbanus does essentially is he unleashes the dramatic expansion of Irish culture and Irish learning and Irish faith onto the continent, across Western Europe and deep into Eastern Europe. The last dot that you're looking at here is heading for Kiev. This Irish presence is established in Kiev by Irish monks from the Irish monastery in Regensburg, who headed eastwards to Kiev in the company of German merchants who were pursuing their economic mission in the company of these Irish monks pursuing their spiritual mission far into the east. And the world that you're looking at here was a world that was as diverse then as it is now. This is a world of different peoples, of different traditions, of different languages and customs and allegiances. But that diversity in the ancient world was seen to be part of the natural order. The diversity that you're looking at here was something good because for the ancients, paradoxically, that diversity and that difference promoted unity, not division. This is an extract from a 4th century philosopher, Libanius, a pagan and a monotheist. And he's writing, God did not bestow all products on all parts of the earth, but distributed his gifts over different regions to the end that men might cultivate a social relationship because one would have the need of the help of another. And so he called commerce into being, that all men might be able to have common enjoyment of the fruits of the earth, no matter where produced. And Libanius isn't advocating raw free market capitalism here. He's making a philosophical point that diversity and the diversity of the natural resources and conditions of the earth make it necessary for nations to communicate through trade and exchange. Therefore, diversity is the promoter of unity, the promoter of exchange, the promoter of contacts. One of the major images from the ancient world that expressed that idea of diversity leading to unity is in ancient political discourse is called the body metaphor. That just like the nations of the earth, the human body is composed of different limbs and different organs, but these limbs and organs work in coordination with each other for their mutual survival, for the benefit of the whole of the body. And the idea is that the world, the empire, is like a human body made up of different nations, different peoples, different tribes. But if these tribes and these peoples and these nations follow the lessons of nature, what they will do is they will work together for their mutual benefit and their mutual survival. This is an extract from the 1st century philosopher Seneca. He says, to injure any human is a crime, for he or she is your fellow citizen in the greater commonwealth. What if the hands should desire to harm the feet, or the eyes the hands? As all members of the body are in harmony with one another, because it is the advantage of the whole that the individual members be unharmed, so humankind should spare the individual human, because all are born for a life of fellowship. And you might be surprised to hear this image was carried into Christianity at a very early stage. This is an extract from the letters of St. Paul, his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, where he uses this, where he is deeply influenced by this aspect of ancient Roman political propaganda and philosophy. Paul writes, for as the body is one and hath many members, and all the members of the body, whereas there are many, yet are one body. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I do not need your help, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. That there might be no schism or division in the body, but that the members might be mutually careful for one another. And the figure who carries this idea with him as he moves through the continent is St. Columbanus. This is an extract from St. Columbanus's letter And this is a letter he sent to the Gaulish, or to the French bishops. Columbanus didn't like bishops. He saw them, and particularly he didn't like French bishops. He saw them as a dead loss. And this is his letter to the French bishops, telling them to get their act together, to work to promote unity rather than division. He says, "For the rest, fathers, pray for us as we also do for you, wretched though we be, and refuse to consider us estranged from you. For we are all joint members of one body, whether Franks or Britons or Irish or whatever our race be." And it's important to note here that at this period in history, the Franks are a Germanic people. So this is the use of the body metaphor as a means of promoting an identity in Europe, which transcends local allegiances, which transcends even national identity itself. This is Columbanus's letter to Pope Gregory the Great at the very end of the 6th century. He writes to the Bishop of Rome, and he calls him to the Holy Lord and Father in Christ, the fairest ornament of the Roman Church, as it were the most honored flower of all of Europe in her decay. This is significant because this is the first time in literature that the word Europe is used with reference to an identity which is used with reference to a Christian identity, which is used with reference to the church. And that essentially is Columbanus's lasting legacy, an identity which transcends the local. In terms of Columbanus's long-term impact on perceptions, not just of Irish identity, but of European identity, I want to concentrate on a foundation which by tradition was established by one of his Irish followers, St. Gall, after whom the Swiss town of St. Gallen is called. This is the Stift in St. Gallen in Switzerland, and this is obviously the church called after this follower of Columbanus, Gall or Gallus. This is the library, the monastic library, where is preserved a list of books written by Irish people, Irish scribes from the first quarter of the 9th century. And also the collection of St. Gallen is available online, another really extraordinary contribution to research in this field. One of the inmates of this monastery in the 9th century was Ermenric, who eventually moves to Ellwangen. And he wrote a life of St. Gall, the follower of St. Columbanus. And it contains a fascinating account of Ireland. He writes about Ireland. He says, Ireland is a land where it never snows. And this guy is living in the Alps, where he's surrounded by snow 365 days of the year. He says in Ireland it never snows, but if it does snow, the snow melts within 3 days. And furthermore, not only have they no snow in Ireland, they also have no snakes. So no snakes in Ireland. This is paradise. This is a very different perception of Ireland. He says, Ireland as a place which is so efficacious against poisons that if you ever have the misfortune to be bitten by a snake, this is what you do. If you ever are bitten by a snake, what you do is you go to the university library in Würzburg and you get your hands on the Würzburg St. Paul and you scrape off the pages and you take the scrapings of an Irish manuscript and you put it into a drink and you drink it back and you will be cured of your snake bite. And he says, at this point, he says, is this really the case? And he says, well, no, not really. This is an allegory for what Ireland represents. He says, what indeed do the leaves of books and everything from that same island of Ireland, which resists poison, signify, but that every divine word spread anywhere from there holds off and drives out vices introduced by the devil and brings about eternal salvation. And eventually he gets to an account of the missionary activities of Irish monks like Gall and like Columbanus on the continent. He says, however, after a long time under Lothair, the king of the Franks, Columbanus, along with the most blessed Gaul and all their companions, left Ireland to convert the unbelief of barbarians everywhere to the faith of Christ. Nor do I think that I should keep silent about Ireland, an island lying between Spain and Britain, whence the radiance of such light reached us. So what he does here is he confounds these ancient perceptions of Ireland and the Irish, and he turns them on their head. This time, the evangelizers, this time the bringers of books, of book learning, are the Irish. And look who this time are the barbarians. The barbarians are those who are living in the European heartlands. It's a challenge, and it's a subversion of these ancient traditions. And that was the impact of Irish learning on the continent. The emergence of a new myth, the myth of the island of saints and scholars. So my best wishes to you for the future of Irish studies in the University of Würzburg. As you can see here, you are building on very ancient and very firm foundations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damian, for a fascinating talk and enlightening us about these early connections between Ireland and Europe. So thank you very much, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, my academic teacher, Jochen Achilles, who is Emeritus Professor of American Studies at the University of Würzburg and Adjunct Professor at the University of Mainz. He has widely taught, researched, and published in American, Irish, and English studies. And today he joins us in his personification as an Irish studies scholar. His authored book publications include 2 monographs in Irish studies, one study on the development of Sean O'Casey's plays Drama als problematische Form, der Wandel zu nicht realistischer Gestaltungsweise im Werk Sean O'Casey's, and another study on the interface between the Gothic tradition and psychological fiction, focusing on Sheridan Le Fanu, entitled Sheridan Le Fanu und die schauerromantische Tradition zur psychologischen Funktion der Motivik von Sensationsroman und Geistergeschichte. He co-edited books on Irish drama, global challenges and regional responses in modern drama, representations of evil in fiction and film, and on liminality and the short story, among many others. His research interests and numerous articles focus on cultural identities, the American short story, African American, and Irish drama. Today, we are looking forward to his keynote lecture on transnationalism and diversity, transformations in Irish culture and Irish studies. Please, Professor Achilles, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, good. Ambassador O'Brien, Lord Mayor Schuchardt, President Pauli, Dean Baumhauer, Chairman Fleckenstein, Professors Rennhak, Eisenmann, and Bergmann, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I thank Professors Maria Eisenmann and Ina Bergmann, the joint initiators of Irish Studies Würzburg, for the invitation to give a talk on this occasion, and also for your generous introduction, Frau Bergmann. I will try to switch now to a PowerPoint presentation, which you will hopefully be able to see, and which will lead us to the other end of interculturalism after we heard of the early forms of intercultural exchanges from Damian Bracken. So I'll try my luck. Can you see this now?
Yes, perfectly.
You can. Okay. Irish Studies networks, such as EFACIS and the Irish Itinerary, are an enormous stimulus for more Irish Studies efforts in Europe, one of which, the Foundation of Irish Studies Würzburg, brings us together today. We fittingly celebrated on April 16th, 2021, the 150th birthday of John Millington Synge, the Irish Renaissance dramatist who stayed in Würzburg in 1894. He did not only end his musical career here, but may also have begun his career as a playwright in Würzburg. W.J. McCormack, his biographer, unearthed a dramatic apprentice piece Synge worked on in Würzburg. A play sketch about a young Irish landlord who returns from abroad and marries a young woman from a cottage on the family estate, dated 23/4/94, Würzburg. Written in German, the piece mixes themes from Goethe and Maria Edgeworth, McCormack adds. Palpable intercultural relations embedded in Synge's play sketch of class, big house and peasantry, language, English, German, and by implication Irish, and influence, Goethe and Maria Edgeworth, persist to this day and also inform the work of EFACIS and the Irish Itinerary. In my talk, I want to delineate some more recent intercultural relations. In necessarily sketchy fashion, I will focus on developments in Irish studies and Irish drama, and more specifically on transformations of Synge's most famous play, The Playboy of the Western World of 1907. First, to Irish culture and Irish studies from nationalism to diversity, a very brief sketch. The period since 1980 has seen the waxing of Irish studies in international dimensions. Ronan MacDonald declares in Irish Literature in Transition, a 6-volume history of Irish literature and its changing reflection of Irish society since 1700. Together with the New Irish Studies, also published by Cambridge University Press in 2020, this is a very substantial recent interdisciplinary attempt to reassess both Irish culture and Irish studies. William Butler Yeats's Kathleen Ni Hoolie Hán is a 1902 peasant drama turning into a national allegory. It is about an old woman deploring the loss of her 4 green fields, the 4 provinces of Ireland. She's periodically and precariously rejuvenated by the blood sacrifice of her followers, and was originally played by activist and feminist Maud Gonne, whom you see on the right. As Yeats famously speculated, this play may have sent out certain men the English shot in the Easter Rising 1916. It became the foundational text in an Irish national tradition. In 1980, Brian Friel's historical play Translations most conspicuously registered the change in mentality from the adherence to a national paradigm of Irish culture to its reflected questioning and the suggestion of new intercultural openness. The image to the left is, by the way, the original program. The opening night in Derry's Guildhall, the seat of the local government in Northern Ireland, on 23rd September 1980, marked a watershed in Irish cultural life. The play's comprehensive debate of linguistic as well as political loyalties in the wide-ranging historical perspective of Ireland's colonial past immediately turned it into a touchstone of cultural self-reflection. The 1833 Hedge School setting of Translations is less historical than experimental. It is a kind of laboratory for the assessment of what is being lost and won by intercultural exchanges. As the theatre movement of Yeats, Lady Gregory, Edward Martyn, and Synge provided the dominant cultural expression of the nationalist paradigm of Irish self-definition around the turn of the 20th century, the drama of Friel, Tom Murphy, Martin McDonagh, Enda Walsh, Christina Reid, Marina Carr, and many others reorganizes old patterns into new syntheses on an intercultural basis around the millennial turn of the next century. From the mid-1990s on, Celtic Tiger affluence accelerated Ireland's transition from an agrarian to a high-tech player in a globalized market, marked not only by emigration and a large diaspora, but conversely, also by immigration and ethnic diversity. In addition, the Good Friday Agreement 1998 ended the violence of the Troubles and altered the situation in Northern Ireland substantially. Both developments together amount to yet another shift in the perception and interpretation of matters Irish. Quote, a largely agricultural state became a multi-ethnic and multicultural nation, heavily dependent on multilateral trade, end quote. The new social situation, assessed by studies such as Cooling and Keohane's 2007 Cosmopolitan Ireland, challenges the post-colonial understanding of Irish society. Ireland begins to hover between colony and colonizer, as MacDonald observes. Ushering in the post-Celtic Tiger or Celtic Cat era, the international financial crisis of 2008 slowed but did not stop demographic change. Unitary nationhood, ardently embraced in earlier periods in the Irish context, is increasingly superseded by multiplicity and a diversification of identities, which, in the words of Stuart Hall, define themselves, quote, not by essence or purity, but by the recognition of a necessary heterogeneity and diversity, by a conception of identity which lives with and through, not despite, difference, end quote. Changing the ways in which Ireland is conceived of in the computer age, digital technologies turn realities into media representations. It is a question of substituting the signs of the real for the real, Jean Baudrillard famously decreed. This also affects concepts of Irishness, which, in Patrick Lonergan's words, develop into, quote, a brand, a commodified abstraction that gives meaning to its purchaser instead of signifying the physical territory of a nation, end quote. As a consequence, Reynolds remarks, the terms Irish writer or Irish literature, once aligned neatly with the author's nationality or the text's setting, are now moving targets that reflect the durability and adaptability of Irish writing. The dissolution of boundaries in increasingly virtual realities also affects the new Irish studies, which share priorities beginning to define the humanities on the whole, a passionate commitment to diversity, equality, and ecological balance, as well as an awareness of the mediatization of realities. These common objectives lead to greater interdisciplinary homogeneity. The new Irish studies are pursuing trends which are not far away from priorities of the new American studies, for example. Boundary crossings become mandatory in a both interdisciplinary and transnational methodology, quote, which advocates porousness among disciplines and intends to dismantle unproductive intellectual silos, end quote. The diversification of cultural spaces, as well as the constructedness of what passes for real, registered by the new Irish studies, is equally obvious in many contemporary artworks, from London Irish playwright Martin McDonagh's American movie 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and The Ferryman, English dramatist J.S. Butterworth's play on the Troubles in Northern Ireland, to Irish-German novelist Hugo Hamilton's Berlin trilogy. To honor the occasion, I would like to illustrate reverberations of the growing diversification of Ireland in Irish drama by some remarks on the meanwhile well-researched non-Irish itinerary of John Millington Synge's masterpiece, The Playboy of the Western World, of which you see the original play poster here. The development of a stable self-image in the face of opposition, resistance to the powers that be, resilience in adversity are at the heart of Synge's Playboy. The initiation story of youthful Christy Mahan, a rural squatter's son in colonial Ireland, is a performative narrative of growing self-awareness, which finally leads to a new attitude and a freer life with a differently calibrated distribution of power and leadership. Fleeing from the scene of the murder of his father he believes he has committed, Christy Mahan arrives in a Mayo pub or shebeen, where he is welcomed by Pegeen Mike, the publican's daughter, and other villagers. Christy's reputation with this community immediately hinges upon the story of how he killed his father, hitting him over the head with a loy, a small spade. In its several retellings, this story becomes more and more exaggerated and gruesomely impressive until, quote, he cleft his father with one blow to the breeches belt, end quote. The increasingly fabricated tale of his crime is also the enabling condition for his transformation, however. A century before the age of social media, the play demonstrates how closely framing, storytelling, and viable self-images are intertwined. Christy will have to find his own way between what is reflected in his father's, quote, devil's own mirror we had beyond would twist a squint across an angel's brow, end quote, and the idealized noble brow Pegeen Mike and her looking glass flatter him with. A process of identity formation which remains topical in a period when mirrors are called Instagram. That Christy's rebellion against paternal authority can be understood as an ambiguous metaphor of political transformation generates the play's complexity, which is in turn responsible for its adaptability. In Inventing Ireland of 1995, Declan Kybert reads Christy's development as a political allegory. Old Mahan, Christy's father, plays the role of an authoritative colonial power, and the community of the Mayo village the role of over-enthusiastic, but in reality timid and undecided romantic nationalists. Liminally oscillating between the paternal shadow image of the loony of Mahans and Pegeen's and the widow Quinn's overblown heroic counter-image of the champion playboy of the Western world, Christy's inner development is the litmus test of successful emancipation that finally leads to independence from exterior framing and to autonomy. In Kybert's reading, this process corresponds to, quote, Frantz Fanon's dialectic of decolonization, from occupation through nationalism to liberation, end quote. Christy unwittingly finds the balance of both grandiloquence and aggressiveness, inferiority and megalomania. While he tries to turn fake news into fact, the villagers accept only fake news as fact, his gallus story, but not his dirty deed. In the end, Christy has tamed, not killed, his twice resurrected father, who seems to thoroughly enjoy his new supporting role. Christy's father slaying is obviously closer to Freud's, or Frank O'Connor's for that matter, Oedipus complex, than to Sophocles' Oedipus the king. What his exodus with his submissive father in tow signifies politically remains open. He leaves, quote, like a gallant captain with his heathen slave and plans to go romancing through a romping lifetime, end quote. Not unlike the Celtic tiger, Christy has turned from colonized subaltern to a colonizer of sorts, Robinson Crusoe in Mayo, as it were. The trajectory of Christy's romping is comprehensive in its promise, but hazy in its concrete contours. It has been associated with the grain bags and field days 5th province and a cosmopolitan nationalist liberation. It also suggests Edward Soldier's third space, moving beyond entrenched boundaries, a margin or edge where ties can be severed and also where new ties can be forged. It can be mapped but never captured in conventional cartographies. It can be creatively imagined but obtains meaning only when practiced and fully lived. I'll turn now to another playboy and other playboys, West Indian, Nigerian, and Chinese versions. Recent intercultural adaptations of the playboy of the Western world seize on Christie in the role of the model decolonizer as analyzed by Kybert and Townsend. Singh's quintessentially Irish playboy thus develops into a, quote, paradigmatic example of an emergent intercultural Irish theatre, end quote. Intercultural drama is, of course, also represented by a sizable number of entirely new plays, some of which are collected in the 2014 drama anthology Staging Intercultural Ireland, which also presents a form of intercultural hurling, apparently. In 1984, Trinidad-born playwright Mustafa Matura published The Playboy of the West Indies. It transposes the plot of Singh's classic from the Mayo Shebeen to a rum shop in Mayaro, an actual fishing village on Trinidad's east coast in 1950. Both Peggy and Ken, the Pegeen and Christie replacements, are of African origin. The Mayaro community proves as adverse to Ken's anti-colonial impulse and even more vindictive than the Mayo villagers. I will focus here on two more recent adaptations. First, the Nigerian playboy. Busy Adigan founded Arambe Productions in 2004, Ireland's first African-Irish theatre company. He struck upon the idea that Singh's Christie is the archetypal asylum seeker. Quote, I see Christie Mahon as the epitome of the majority of immigrants constantly searching for who they are in a foreign land, end quote. Adigan approached Roddy Doyle, one of the most popular contemporary Irish writers, to co-write an adaptation of Singh's Playboy. Doyle and also the Abbey Theatre cooperated. Jointly written by a well-known Irish writer and an also well-known advocate of interculturalism from Nigeria, and co-produced by an Irish-African theatre company and the Abbey Theatre, Playboy of the Western World New Version, as it was called, was staged as the National Theatre's centennial production of the Playboy in 2007, showcasing the post-ethnic mindset of the new multicultural Ireland. Based on a real-life Nigerian story, Christopher Malomo, the Yoruba Christie, tries to kill his father with a pestle instead of a loy, which you could see on the Arambe poster we had before. He arrives in a modern suburban pub on the west side of Dublin, which features closed-circuit video surveillance. The regulars Google the Nigerian misdeed. The parallel between Christie Mahon's outsider status in the Mayo community and the fate of contemporary refugee Christopher Malomo in Dublin does not quite dovetail, however. For one thing, Christopher's, quote, act of murder in Nigeria disqualifies him under the Irish Refugee Act of 1996, end quote, as Townsend points out. Christopher has a university education, holds an MBA, comes from a wealthy background of upward mobility in Nigeria, and in the end, with passport in hand, obviously, quote, heads not for Christie Mahon's limitless future, but back to Nigeria with his not dead, newly reacquired, very wealthy father, end quote. The shady milieu of the play in which Singh's sports on the beach turn into a street fight between rival gangs is perhaps not the soundest basis for the new Irish interculturalism, nor is Christopher Malomo's acculturation as an agent hired by Michael James, Singh's publican, who has been promoted to a dangerous drug lord in the outskirts of Dublin. Christopher, quote, confirms rather than challenges stereotypes of deceit and criminality associated with asylum seekers, end quote, MacIver criticizes. The Chinese Playboy. Dublin-based Pan Pan Theatre was founded in 1993 by artistic co-directors Edin Cosgrove and Gavin Quinn. It is an avant-gardist theatre company which has toured widely and successfully both nationally and internationally. Their Playboy co-production with the Beijing Oriental Pioneer Theatre was shown in Beijing first and later also in Dublin. Pan Pan director Gavin Quinn wrote an adaptation of Singh's play in a modern-day Beijing setting. In a complicated translation process, Chinese dramatist Yue Sun and co-producer Wang Zhaohui rendered it in the colloquial street language of contemporary Beijing, making also use of a Mandarin translation of Singh's original from the 1920s. For the performances in Dublin of the all-Chinese cast, subtitles of Singh's original text were added. Reminiscent of Brendan Behan's lodging house setting in The Hostage of 1958, which functions as combined IRA headquarters and brothel, the play is set in, quote, whore-dressers, a hairdresser / foot massage parlor / brothel on the outskirts of contemporary Beijing. Cosmetic treatments serve as a front for prostitution, as illegal pochine consumption may have been similarly camouflaged in Michael James's original Shebeen. The women populating the Pan Pan hairdressers, wearing miniskirts and lingerie, turn into reality Christie's imagined, quote, drift of chosen females standing in their shifts itself, end quote, whose mere mention allegedly caused the Playboy riots in 1907. The Beijing production faced its own riots in 2006 as audience members registered complaints with the Chinese Ministry of Culture about the highly sexualized nature of the performance. The Pan Pan website markets the Dublin performance using sensationalist newspaper headlines as the ones you see. Over-enthusiastic or prudishly indignant Chinese reactions to scantily clad performers in Beijing figure as an invitation to watch the play in Dublin. Building on the original Christie's extensive self-reflection in a mirror, the condensed 80-minute performance develops stage realism into the contemporary cultural context of reality television by video coverage of the actors preparing in the dressing rooms and the use of salon mirrors reflecting the audience. There is a short video that gives an impression. Concerning the political accentuation of the production, a debate developed between Gavin Quinn, the Irish director, and his Chinese collaborators about the descent of Ma Shang, the Chinese Christy Mahan. Quinn wanted him to hail from Xinjiang, the troubled Uyghur and Sino-Muslim province in the northwest of China. As Quinn feared Chinese government censorship and Yue Sun interethnic vulnerabilities, Ma Shang is marked as an outsider in less controversial ways in Beijing than in Dublin. In Beijing, Ma Shang comes from the northeast province of Dongbei. In Dublin, he is presented as a Muslim Uyghur. In the Chinese context, people from Dongbei are perceived as sufficiently different to mark them as outsiders. In Dublin, Ma Xiang's Uyghur identity addresses the debate of human rights violations in China and suggests parallels to the British colonization of Ireland. Whereas in Beijing, he appears just different. In Dublin, Ma Xiang's Muslim identity is foregrounded. He praises Allah frequently and wears a Muslim skull cap. In Singh's original, Christy Mahan is at one point suspected of having fought, quote, bloody wars for Kruger and the freedom of the Boers in South Africa. Ma Xiang is asked whether he was off to the Middle East fighting bloody wars for Osama bin Laden and the freedom of the Arabs. Like the discrepancies between the original and its adaptations, the both very successful Beijing and Dublin versions of the Pan production reflect differences of political and cultural context, of traditions, perspectives, and intentions, which Gavin Quinn, Yue Sun, and Wang Zhaoyi had to negotiate. The mirrors on the Dublin stage, in which the theatre goers can watch themselves, convey problems as well as promises of the play's interculturalism. Like Christie and Old Mahan, originally faced with their respective transformations, and meanwhile with Caribbean, Chinese, and Nigerian variants, Ireland as a nation may collectively ask in disbelief, is it me? Adaptability only goes so far, however. Christopher Morash and Sean Richards raised the question as to, quote, what relationship these playboys have to their Singian predecessor beyond the title and the bare elements of the plot, end quote. But Arambi Productions' enthusiasm for the insertion of African perspectives into Irish society and Pan's engagement with Chinese culture are ongoing. Bridging gaps seems more important than noticing gaps. This spirit also continues to inform Irish studies. The autumn-winter issue, 2020 issue of the Irish University Review, the journal of the International Association for the Study of Irish Literature, opens by a section entitled Amplifying Us, New Writing in Ireland. The contributions, a collection of stories and poems, are by an Irish traveller leader and by Irish, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic writers who want to break up, quote, the ways whiteness and Irishness have been intertwined for too long, end quote, as Emma Penny writes in her introduction. The stories and poems brought together in Amplifying Us deal with leading the life of, quote, the Schrödinger cat of being Irish, simultaneously Irish and not Irish, visible and not visible, in and out of the pale, end quote. As Philomena Mullen, born in Ireland to an Irish mother and a Nigerian father, describes herself. This vital concern for issues of identity and ethnicity, oppression and migration, economic and gender problems in Irish culture, goes along with embedding internationally thriving Irish studies in increasingly intercultural and transnational contexts. Irish Studies Würzburg is one of the latest additions to these contexts. All of us, I believe, wish Ina Bergmann and Maria Eisenmann all the best for their future development. Thank you.
Dear Professor Achilles, thank you very much for this very intriguing and I would also say very knowledgeable talk on all these transformations in Irish culture and Irish studies, but also on transnationalism and diversity. I have learned a lot tonight. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Ireland is inextricably linked with its wonderful music. And so, despite the virtual format, we did not want to have this event without live music. So let me now introduce our band to you who are about to play some traditional Irish music. Let me start with Ella Zlotos, who is also here tonight, who is a flutist, songwriter and teacher based in Würzburg. During her studies, she spent some time in Ireland, where she learned to play the tin as well as the low whistle and became familiar with traditional repertoire and techniques. There is also Georg Zobel, who took up the fiddle in 2007 and has acquired a broad range of Irish and Scottish traditional tunes and techniques since. He has been playing lots of sessions and gigs in the local Irish trad scene around Würzburg. Last but not least, Nick Jira is a freelance musician, composer and audio engineer based in Würzburg. He studied jazz piano and has been playing the guitar for several years, but only recently discovered the beauty of traditional Irish folk tunings, which he also uses in his own compositions. Now, you can listen to the band for more than half an hour, and maybe you like to get something to eat or drink, and then please come back at 7 o'clock sharp to continue with the author's readings. But now, please enjoy the beautiful music.
Good evening, and thank you very much for inviting us. Unfortunately, we cannot play live for you tonight, so we recorded a couple of Irish tunes in this place, in our favorite pub, which is the Hans Huckebein in Würzburg. We used to play regular trad sessions in here, and so we thought it to be the perfect place for this video, which will hopefully be able to bring some pub atmosphere into your offices, your living rooms, or wherever you're participating in this event right now. Thanks to Dr. Ina Bergmann, to Professor Maria Eisenmann, and to the Irish Studies Würzburg team for organizing this and for inviting us to this event. Thanks to dear Molly Klingler for recommending our music, and of course to Connie, who owns this fantastic place, for allowing us to shoot our little video in here. So, enough talking from me. We hope you enjoy our tunes, and happy birthday to Irish Studies Würzburg.
What a delightful concert. Thank you very much again, Ella Zlotos, Georg Zobel, and Nick Jira. We are now coming to the evening highlight of this event, a reading and discussion by Northern Irish authors Colette Price, hello Colette, and Jen Carson, hello Jen. This part of our event will be moderated by Professor Katharina Rennhak. And before she takes over, and even though you have heard her talk today before, I'd like to briefly introduce her. Katharina Rennhak is Professor of English Literary Studies at the University of Wuppertal. She has published mainly on British and Irish Romanticism and contemporary fiction, and is the author of 2 monographs, the more recent one dealing with the narrative construction of masculinities on British and Irish Romanticism, and dealing with the narrative construction of masculinities in British and Irish women writers' novels around 1800, wrong line. Among her edited collections are Women Constructing Men, Female Novelists and Their Male Characters, 1750 to 2000, Narrating Ireland in Different Genres and Media, Relevance and Narrative Research, and Postfaktisches Erzählen, Post-Truth, Fake News, Narration. Walter Macken, Critical Perspectives, co-edited with Sandra Heinen, has just been accepted for publication by Cork University Press. And as you already know, if you attended the event earlier, Professor Rennhak is president of the European Federation of Associations and Centers of Irish Studies, EFACIS, and a member of the executive board of the International Association for the Study of Irish Literature. She's the European representative, and also a board member of the Center for Narrative Research at the University of Wuppertal. And we're very happy that with her expertise in Irish studies, she will be the moderator of this reading and discussion today. Thank you. And the stage is yours, Katharina, Jen, and Colette.
Thank you so much, Ina, and also Maria, again for having invited me to moderate this session. Thank you for the nice introduction, but of course, from now on, it's all about Jen and Colette, and now I also found you both on the screen. Hi, that's great to see you there. I just want to give the audience a little overview of what we have planned for the next almost 2 hours, I guess. We'll start with a little warm-up discussion, and then we'll give each author the opportunity to read from their works. We'll start with Colette Price, whom I'll then properly introduce, and she then reads. And then in the next step, Jen Carson, I'll introduce her properly, and she'll read, both for about 25 minutes. And then we'll start a little conversation, the 3 of us, and you're then welcome to join in into that discussion. Well, but let's get started. Welcome, Colette Price, award-winning poet from Derry, now living in Newcastle. Welcome, Jen Carson, award-winning novelist and author of short fiction, living in Belfast. We all are by now experts in meeting virtually, or as I like to put it, we've turned from humans to Zoomans. But we do also lead lives away from the screen, or some of us still try to do. And what I'm curious about is, how did you two experience this last year, and how has the pandemic impacted your lives as authors, as writers?
Shall I kick off?
Sure.
First of all, can I say it's really lovely to be here tonight, and thank you for the welcome, Katharina and Aina. And it's so nice to see in tiny little squares so many friends and familiar faces. So first of all, greetings from East Belfast. I have had quite a strange pandemic. I know everyone has, but I've been very much by myself. Our lockdown has been quite strict here in Northern Ireland, and I live in a tiny little terraced house. We would call them 2 up, 2 downs in East Belfast, with neighbours sandwiched on either side, and I live by myself. So a lot of my pandemic has been spent up here in my own head. And like, I guess like a number of writers I've heard, I've had kind of 2 different phases of lockdown. A phase that I went through where I found it desperately difficult to create or to think imaginatively about anything at all. The fear got in, the panic, and lethargy, I guess, as well. And then it's been interrupted by these glorious phases of uninterrupted creativity, where I felt like, gosh, this is a real gift of a year to not be traveling and traipsing all around the world, to not be distracted by other things, and to not only give myself to writing, but for me, it's been a brilliant chance to stop and think about why I write the way I write. So I've done a lot of academic reading this year, a lot of learning about magical realism, a lot of learning about Northern Irish writers that I hadn't read before. Read my first Colette Bryce this year and really enjoyed it. So, and that wasn't just because of this event. So it has been a fantastic opportunity to kind of expand my thinking, but peppered with moments of just extreme loneliness and frustration as well.
You've both also published books. You've books that came out in this momentous year 2020, and I'm sure book launches were also a new and strange experience, conducting them virtually, right? But we want to hear from your books and hear you read, of course, and that's what we'll concentrate on now. So I'll begin with introducing Colette Bryce. Colette Bryce, as I already said, is a poet from Derry, Northern Ireland, now living in Newcastle, as we also heard. She has published 6 poetry collections, including The Full Indian Rope Trick, 2004, and Self-Portrait in the Dark, 2008, Whole and Grain Domed Universe, 2014, and most recently, published again by Picador in 2020, The M Pages. Picador has also published Colette Bryce's selected poems in 2017. Colette received the Eric Gregory Award for Emerging Poets in 1995. Her first collection, The Heel of Bernadette, received, among others, the inaugural Strong Award for Irish Poets, and she won first prize in the UK National Poetry Competition for the title poem of her second book, The Full Indian Rope Trick. The Whole and Grain Domed Universe, which draws on Colette's experience of growing up in Derry during the Troubles, received a Christopher Ewart Biggs Award in memory of Seamus Heaney, and was shortlisted for the Ford Costa and Roehampton Poetry Prizes. Her selected poetry was a PBS Special Commendation and winner of the Piggott Prize for Irish Poetry. Colette has held numerous writing fellowships at the Universities of Newcastle, Manchester, Notre Dame, Trinity College Dublin, and in 2018, the Heimbold Chair in Irish Writing at Villanova University, Pennsylvania. Colette is also the current editor of Poetry Ireland Review. Welcome again, and we are excited to hear you read from your poetry collections. Jen is, as I already said, a Belfast-based author and also a community arts facilitator Her first novel, published in 2014 and entitled Markham Orange Disappears, was published to great critical acclaim, as was her short story collection Children's Children, published in 2016. In 2017, Jen published her first flash fiction anthology, Postcard Stories. Her second, and again beautifully illustrated, collection of microfiction, Postcard Stories 2, was published with Emma Press in 2020. Her critically acclaimed magic realist novel, The Firestarters, was published in 2019. Jen's latest book, The Last Resort, which is a collection of interlinked short stories, was first published as a radio drama in 10 episodes by BBC4 last February, and is now available in book form since the 1st of April. Her novel, The Firestarters, won the EU Prize for Literature for Ireland in 2019, the Kitschy's Prize for Speculative Fiction in 2020, and was shortlisted for the Dalkey Book Prize, also 2020. Jen won the Harper's Bazaar Short Story Competition in 2016 and has been shortlisted for the BBC National Story Prize and the Sean Foylan Short Story Prize. She was the inaugural Irish Writers' Centre Roaming Writer in Residence on the Trains of Ireland in 2019 and the Open Book Scotland Writer in Lockdown during 2020. Jen is currently writer in residence on an academic research project at Queen's University Belfast that explores the depiction of dementia in contemporary fiction. And her third novel, The Raptors, is in the making and forthcoming from Doubleday in spring 2022. We look very much forward to your reading.
Thank you so much, Katharina, and apologies for that tongue twister over the roaming writer in residence, which is really hard to say. I am not as sophisticated as Colette and haven't worked out how to put my text on the screen, so I'm going to do my best to make eye contact and read from a book at the same time. What I thought I would do is give you two slightly longer readings. I'm going to begin with a reading from The Firestarters, my 2019 novel, and then I'm going to give you hopefully a whole little story from the Caravan Stories, The Last Resort, which just came out a few weeks ago. I thought I'd begin with a reading which I very rarely give from The Firestarters because it seems quite pertinent in Northern Ireland at the minute. We are all a little bit on tenterhooks at the minute with recent violence. And it's actually been quite heartening in the last few days to hear some of the commentators beginning to pick beneath the surface of why these things happen in Northern Ireland and not just look at the kind of surface results, but going into issues like enormous amounts of unemployment and mental health issues and some of the background that the young men who are getting involved in these riots are growing up with. And so I'm going to read you quite a troubling monologue from about halfway through the novel, where Sammy, who is the main protagonist in the novel and an ex-paramilitary, an ex-loyalist paramilitary, is talking to his son Mark, who's got involved in the unrest, about the nature of violence and where violence comes from. And I think quite often we oversimplify these things. To be violent is a very complicated thing, and it's very deeply rooted in a lot of people, and that's what this monologue kind of begins to unpick. Sammy. You are your father's son, as I was my father's son, and he the same most likely, definitely his father before him, who came back from the war and beat a fella dead with bricks for talking shite about the Queen. You've seen him in photos at your nan's. He's the one with the beard and the soldier get-up. In our family, we all have the same face in us. Intimidating's what they call it round here, which is a nice way of saying you wouldn't want to meet any of us in a dark street. It's not just me and your granda. Your uncles are cut from the same old sheet too. Matty's inside and Jim is just this month out. The other two are only marking time. They cannot hold their anger still. They're always looking to ruin something. Even your Auntie Kathleen has a mouth on her like hammers. She once broke a woman's finger for taking the last trolley at Tesco. When she was a wee lassie, she'd unbox him. That wasn't normal for girls back then. The rage runs through us all, as if we have two kinds of blood pumping side by side, red blood and blood that is much darker. All the way back it goes to the first brute Egypt who raised his hand in anger and hit. That was Cain, was it not? Did you do him in Sunday school with the other lads, Noah and Moses and your man with the stripy coat? I did. I could see where Cain was coming from, killing Abel. You have to put the competition in its place. A fellow like Cain would do well in the East. Of course, you're not just mine, are you? You've your mother's blood in you as well. Her side are country folk, the sort of people who lift their dinner straight from the field and properly believe in church. They're strong folk like us, but it's the strength for lifting and carrying, not for beating down. You've your mother to thank for your good looks and the way your hair turns straw in the sun. You're clean whip smart, so you are. You didn't get this from either of us. You come at everything sideways, son. It's as if you're standing on a step ladder looking down. This is not to say you're better than me, and it's not to say you're worst. You just have more options. You're sharp with your mind and sharp with your tongue. If you want to, you can cut people. You do not need to use your fists. When I was your age, I had fists for every man who crossed me. This one was a tout, the next a tag, and the fella after, just your regular gobshite running his mouth off at the bar. I laid into everyone the same. Up came the blood, and the blood was a curled fist. You know it yourself, son, that kind of rage is a solid thing. You cannot swallow it or see your way through. I could never ease myself till there was blood on the floor or bones cracking like split sticks. I had a sharp knife in one hand and a brick in the other. I liked to leave marks. I left marks all the way down the Castlereagh Road and up the Newtonards. You could see where I'd been. It felt as if I was leaking. Later the fists were not enough to keep me. I had guns. It was easy to find a gun in them days. Once you had one gun, it attracted others. Your mother has probably told you about the guns and the way they left holes in us every time they went off. Your mother is a woman. Women do not understand guns. They do not like loudness of any kind. No doubt she's claimed the guns were the death of us, the end of all our smiling days. Probably she cried while telling you this, held your hand in hers and asked you never to touch a gun, even for picking off rabbits. It's all true, son. Listen to your mother. Listen well. After the guns, we were not the same kind of together. There's two sides to it, though. Your mother won't have told you that a gun is a kind of anchor, that it rests heavy in your hand. She's never known the way your head will slow and clear like a pint settling every time you pull the trigger, how you will be God in this second and afterwards wish to claw the moment back. Fully God and fully man, they said in the Bible of Jesus. You can get the same head melt from firing a shotgun, no crucifixion required. There's nothing half as holy. Your mother doesn't understand that this was never about the politics, the flags and freedom, God and country of it all. They were only words I stood behind. I did it again and again with fists and guns and sometimes bombs for the pure blood rush of being alive. Believe me, son, you'll always feel the bigger man when you're standing over somebody else. You were the end to this. You came down like a solid wall. I wouldn't have stopped for your mother, or my mother, or even the cause calling me into line. But the first time I held you in the crook of my arm, there was a weight to you, a heaviness I'd never felt in a gun. You scared me shitless, with your wee face and your fingers hooking onto mine. I hadn't been this feared in months. I hadn't ever felt this loud. This is it, said I to your mother. I am fully God and fully man, right here on the living room sofa. Or words to that effect. Away on with you, Sammy, said your mother back. She didn't believe that everything could change so sharply on a day. She was like a ship going in the one direction for so long it couldn't ever turn without tipping. Everything went forward from the moment of you. Job, house, nice pullovers from Marks and Spencer's, proper holidays in the sun. I couldn't leave the East completely, but I moved us away from the river and over the ring road until we were so far east we were almost a different direction. I put you in a good school, gave you a brother and sister to ground you, forced a violin into your hands, and when that didn't take, I tried the trumpet. An instrument of some sort was essential. and a university degree. It would stand with you when folks asked where it was you'd grown up. I wanted you to take root here, to be a different breed of man. I'm a different man these days. It's been 20 years since I last raised my fists and hit. I don't feel like a different man. I feel like I'm a stranger. I'm carrying my own self around inside me like a pregnant woman or one of them Russian dolls. When I look back, I can still see where I've come from. I could close my eyes and drive them streets in my sleep. All those cars and little houses eyeing me from either side of the road. I could find the marks I've left there, in the street and on the people. They'll remember me even now. You never forget that kind of rage. But I don't go there anymore. I don't take you or your brother or sister. I don't even tell you about it. I want everything to be golden for you, son. I want everything to move forwards. But here we are with these tall fires and all the broken mess of you. The whole city's burning and you are at the centre of it. Talking the bloody talk of my younger days. Flags and bonfires, civil liberties and free speech. No point denying your involvement. Do you think a father can't tell his own son's hand raised in anger? Do you think your hand is redder than mine? I doubt it, son. Do you not know where your darkness comes from? I would like to say I'm proud of you. I was almost proud of you once when you carried yourself like an ordinary boy, when you kicked footballs and rode bikes, thieved my drink when I wasn't looking. I'm not proud of you now. There's no sense in the thing you're doing. It's only moving backwards. I would like to say I love you. Wanting to love someone is not the same as truly loving them, though sometimes it's a good start. Ask your mother about this. Say you're asking for a friend. I'm afraid of you now, son, as I am afraid of the violent man sleeping inside me, as I am afraid of my own fists and the way they clench without my thinking about it every time I stand still. You're your father's son. I can see it in your hands. I am afraid for you and how you are ruining yourself. I'll leave that there because I'm sure you're all thoroughly depressed now. It's actually quite a hard piece to read, but I think it kind of resonates a wee bit at the minute. I thought for the second half of my reading, I'd read you something that's got a wee bit more humour in it. As Katharina mentioned, right in the middle of lockdown, I was commissioned to write 10 short monologues for Radio 4 that would be linked together. And I'm quite glad that Colette mentioned, Katharina asked Colette about the first person in her work. It was the biggest thing for me in lockdown. I couldn't write anything that wasn't in first person. I don't know if that means that I was self-obsessed or I just had spent too much time in my own head, but a whole rake of monologues started coming out. These 10 stories are set in a fictional caravan park in Ballycastle. It's not a real caravan park. I do not want to get sued because it is the most depressing caravan park in Northern Ireland. So I have to emphasize it's not real. I certainly won't be getting any bonuses from the North Coast Tourism Board in the next wee while. To write about caravans at the minute was a really interesting thing to do because a caravan is, caravan park is a collection of people thrown together from all sorts of different places. As we were here in East Belfast during lockdown, it felt like, community became a big thing. And yet caravans are also little bubbles where you're kind of isolated from everybody else as well. So I felt very much like that during lockdown. And so the caravan park came naturally to me. The other thing that I wanted to play with in caravans was the idea of the static caravan. I don't know where you are, but in Northern Ireland, the static caravan is a huge kind of, middle class kind of goal to have a static caravan at the North Coast. And the static caravan as a metaphor works very well for Northern Ireland. It should be going somewhere, but it really isn't. And so a lot of these stories, as they interconnect, explore kind of some of the themes that are pertinent in Northern Ireland. And you'll see this, I'm going to read you the very first story. I think it takes about 13 minutes to read, so hopefully that's okay. If not, Katharina, do this and I will start to read faster. This is Pete's story, and Pete is the caretaker of the caravan park. And you'll get an idea of all the different themes coming into play. Frankie's rallied the troops. They're eager to get the show on the road. Frankie says he thinks the rain's for lifting. They all nod optimistically, though every one of them's dressed for a downpour. Happy Trevor's in his wellies. The ladies are sporting Dunn's anoraks, hooded and zipped to the chin. They'd put you in mind of Teletubbies, but you wouldn't want to tell them that. Frankie has donned a fisherman's hat, the sort Oasis wore in the 90s. It sits high on his head like a loft extension. Given his age and the sombre occasion, it strikes me as somewhat undignified. Do you need a hand? Asks Happy Trevor. I want to say, of course I want a bloody hand. It nearly killed me getting the bench out of the van. I had to roll it arse over end across the car park. It's still sitting where it landed outside my caravan. I'd started picturing me out there in the summer, strumming the guitar while the sun went down. I mean, I probably wouldn't have bothered. I'd feel a right numpty singing with this lot gawping through their curtains, but the idea of it appealed. Obviously, I knew the bench was Frankie's. It's his name on the wee brass plaque. To Lynette, always remembered, love forever, Mum and Dad. I knew he'd want it put somewhere meaningful. Just wasn't expecting him so soon. We're only going 200 yards, but Kathleen has packed for a day trip. Tea in a flask and china mugs, sandwiches, tray bakes, a first aid kit. She's made her hubby bring the camera. Happy Trevor looks suitably thrilled. She has him documenting everything for Frankie's sake. What's a blind fella going to do with photos? He's hardly going to frame them. If you ask me, the whole thing's a bit unhinged, but there's no point reasoning with this lot. You'd sooner turn the DUP. Today's the first day of the season. It gets earlier every year. Most of the regulars will arrive later. The ones with kids like Lois's lot can't get down till after 6. The retired contingent appeared before 6. AM, not PM, I kid you not. They wanted to beat the traffic. The way they talk, you'd think it was nose to bumper from Dunsilly. It hasn't been like that for years. We'd be half empty till Easter. Ballycastle's a ghost town in winter. Anybody with sense or money will take every opportunity to easy jet the hell out of Ulster. For 40 quid, you can half term in a proper city, somewhere with fountains and decent wine. It's only the desperate and depraved who choose to spend February in a caravan. Muggins here doesn't have a choice. I heard the oldies arriving in my dreams. Ford Mondeos reversing slowly, kettles and hoovers grumbling, good morning Ulster on the radio. I should have been up. I'm meant to be responsible now. If I don't make another bollocks of this season, the whole shebang is coming to me. I'm not off to the best of starts. I was still flat out when Frankie appeared at my door. Are you up yet, son? He shouted. It's today, so it is. When do you want to do the bench? He was all for starting then and there, at 10 to 7, in the dark. I fobbed him off with a mug of tea. While I was making it, I'd a stroke of genius. Pure hanging I was, God knows where the idea came from, but I heard myself telling him Lynette would have wanted everybody there. We should wait till folks get their breakfasts in them. This seemed to sit well with Frankie. He took his tea and a chocolate digestive and plunked himself down on the bench to wait. I felt awful lying to him. I'd no notion what Lynette would want. She was well dead by the time I heard about her. My cousin Kevin filled me in the summer I turned 9. Dad buggered off that Christmas, leaving me and Mammy on our own. Uncle Jim had us down to Seacliff for the 12th fortnight. Uncle Jim's always been kind like that. Me and Kevin were in the car park kicking a football when he pointed out the scorch mark. That's where the wee girl exploded, he told me. You weren't born back then. After I found out about Lynette, I wouldn't do goalie anymore. We always piled our jumpers up at that end, and I felt sick standing where she'd died. The rain definitely isn't lifting. I can feel it sogging through my jacket. Happy Trevor's still waiting for an answer. Do I want a hand with the bench? I'm not that fit at the best of times. After 2 months caretaking with nothing to do but eat and booze, I've gone to flab. I could seriously do with a hand. I consider my options. They're limited, to say the least. Frankie's blind, Trevor's pushing 80, John has his hands full with the wife, she's clearly doting. Him and that woman Anna, the lonely looking one in the cardigans, have her firmly clamped between them. Do you think Martha was about to bolt? There's a bad-tempered Yorkie to contend with and a quarter-mile of boggy field. God almighty, it's last of the summer wine I've landed in. No, you're grand, I say. I can manage. I like to say Happy Trevor looks relieved, but he's only got 2 facial expressions, both of which are scowls. I haul one end of the bench onto my shoulder. My back makes a noise it's never made before. Now's the time to admit defeat. I could call Uncle Jim and ask him to send a cousin down, but the oldies are already fallen in, forming a kind of cortege. Martha starts humming the funeral march. It's not her fault. She doesn't know where she is, but it isn't helping one wee bit. Frankie starts sniffling. Right, son, he mumbles. Let's take my wee girl home to rest. Seemingly, this is a funeral now. I don't have the strength to object. Let's go a ways and we're off. The back legs trail behind me, skipping 2 deep rivets out of the grass. Tomorrow I'll have to come back and fix the mess. It's a nightmare being the responsible one. Uncle Jim's left strict instructions. Do whatever Frankie wants. He still feels bad about Lynette. She would have been turning 50 this year. Not that Jim could have stopped it. If anything, it's Frankie's fault. If you were in the RUC back then, you knew to be careful about your car. You didn't send your weans on ahead with the keys, even if you were on holidays. Frankie must know that himself. We're all here to help him, but you can tell all the same that the fella doesn't want helping. It's the pain that's keeping him alive. Frankie wants Lynette's bench up on the cliff, so up on the cliff it'll have to go, even if I wreck my back in the process, even if it seems a bit demented encouraging folks to sit up there when the cliff's eroding. One false move and you'd be over the edge. Frankie claims Lynette liked the view, the sea and the scenery and all that. Aye, right. She was 15 when she died. What sort of teenager likes a view? If I was older or had more gumption, I'd level with him. I'd tell him to leave the bench down here near the kiddies' playground, where everyone can get the good of it. I'd tell him it'd be symbolic. Peace and children being the future and all that crap they put on murals now. Maybe this is a kind of test. Uncle Jim's way of discovering whether I've got what it takes to run Seacliff. It's not too late for him to call things off, though it was only yesterday he dropped down the dates. Think about it, son, he said. I'd like to retire before the summer. I haven't looked at them yet. It won't feel real till I see my name there next to owner. I've been carrying around the envelope inside my jacket. I haven't opened it yet. I'm not ready for Seacliff to be real. Do I have what it takes to step into Jim's shoes? Do I even want to try? Uncle Jim's the Richard Branson of our family. He has the Barbers, a pub, 2 takeaways, Chinese and ordinary, and this site. He called it Seacliff because the sea can be seen from the cliff behind it. Uncle Jim hasn't a creative bone in his body. Nobody in our family does. Mammy's always wondering where I got the music from and why I couldn't have got something useful instead, something a bit more lucrative. You'll be surprised to hear I had no great ambition to run a failing caravan park. 6 months ago, I was all for leaving. London, Berlin, Amsterdam. I won't be telling Uncle Jim. He's big up on the orange himself, but I got the Irish passport and everything. Sure, we'd no notion what Brexit was going to mean. There were mad rumours flying around. You'd need a visa to get down to Dublin. Derry was declaring independence. They were digging a moat around the border. I knew if I didn't leave soonish, I'd end up staying. Here you either go when you're young or you're stuck for good. I wanted to have a stab at the music. I wasn't Dylan or anything, but I had a few good songs and a decent voice. If worst came to worst, I could do covers in the Irish bars. U2, Van, the Cranberries. Foreigners go mad for an Irish accent, especially the Americans. Can't tell the difference between East Belfast and the wilds of Cork. Then Uncle Jim had the stroke and the doctor told him to start thinking about early retirement. The pub and the Barbers went to Kevin. My cousin Nigel got the takeaways. I wasn't expecting Jim to offer me Seacliff. If he'd gone about it any other way, I'd have been all, thanks, but no thanks, Uncle Jim. But he made such a scene of it, standing up at the Christmas table, announcing that I was like a son to him and he wanted me to have a bit of his empire. Jesus, it was touching stuff. I was sat there gurning in my cracker hat. My mammy, she was gurning too. She hadn't looked that proud since I got my bronze Duke of Ed. After that, I could hardly tell him I was heading off. There'll be no leaving now. Seacliff's got me. There's something stuck about this place. All the caravans here are statics. Nobody's going anywhere fast. And maybe leave it there.
Thank you, Jen, for reading from the novel and your latest short story collection. That's really great. And also thanks for having answered my first question already, and therefore compensating a bit of the time problem that we would have run in otherwise, because I would have asked about the first person voices in your fictional texts, which are less obviously autobiographical, but as you've just explained, they've also helped you through lockdown. So first question I already answered, and I think we can in a way now open it up from here into a discussion of some questions which are relating to both your books.
Talking about cosmopolitanism, and probably we can more specifically, and of course that's something that I'm interested in because I'm teaching American studies, and I know that both of you do have experiences in living in the United States, and I also know from what I know from your work that you've been influenced by American writers. Colette even mentioned Emily Dickinson and Elizabeth Bishop in her reading earlier, and I know that Jan is, influenced by George Saunders and other writers who are also flirting, I'd say, with magic realism. And I'd like to hear, or whether you also, have that feeling of being influenced by the American literary scene, or how you see your writing in relation to American art.
So I guess I lived in Portland in Oregon on the West Coast. And while I was there, got slammed between two huge literary influences, which were Raymond Carver coming down from the Pacific Northwest and Richard Brautigan coming up from California. And I think if you put me into a kind of mixing bowl with the two of them, I hope that my work would kind of be the bastardized child of Brautigan and Carver. And to me as well, I think that probably is George Saunders nowadays. And Saunders to me is the best living writer on the planet at the minute, primarily because of his kindness and his humanity. He writes from a place of just really being very humane. So even his dark writing and his writing, which kind of really gets to the bones of why human beings are horrible, horrible people, I can tell that he really loves people, and he's starting from that place. And that's been incredibly important for me as I begin to write, particularly about the kind of unionist, loyalist, Protestant community here in Northern Ireland. They frustrate the back teeth off me. It is my community. I am part of it. I grew up in it. I quite often would like to bang their heads off a brick wall, but I need to start from that place of humanity and seeing the wonder and the holiness and the beauty in those people. Even as they're pitching petrol bombs at each other, they're still human beings. And I've learned that from Saunders. And it's partially why I'm a magic realist, because I think magic realism, when you bring in the fantastical, you're showing that everybody has the potential for wonder and magic and the fantastic in who they are. So yeah, if I ever had one of those fantasy dinner parties, it would be me, George Saunders, Richard Brautigan and Raymond Carver. And I feel like Carver would be really grumpy and not want to talk to the rest of us.
Two more questions from the audience. Sorry for not turning on the microphone. At the moment, Petra Weppermann.
Yes, it's actually Ricardo Weppermann. It's just wrong name. But right. I want to ask, I already heard that you're inspired by different authors, but I want to know if you always knew that you want to be a writer yourself, or was there a special event or book or anything that made you want to write? Or have you just always loved literature?
I can go first, yeah. The answer is no. I wanted to be a football commentator whenever I was a teenager. And I did my work experience job shadowing one of the great Northern Irish football commentators, Jackie Fullerton, if anybody knows who that is. And I was just always a big reader, but I didn't come to writing until I was like in my late 20s, really. And it was partially through that move to Portland. It was the first time for me. I grew up in a very conservative evangelical Protestant, very Calvinistic kind of household where art was frowned upon. So there was no role models or nobody that would have pointed towards the possibility of having art as a career. And living in Portland, Oregon, which is like going from, I grew up in Ballymena, which is like zero art, and Portland was like not to like 1,000 miles an hour overnight because it's the most artistic place ever. And that was the point for me where I thought, oh, actually, this is something that I could do. And I always point to community as a really important thing, because if it hadn't been for that community of artists and creatives that I fell into, I think I probably would have come home and never have done this, and probably been like a primary school teacher, because I wasn't a very good football commentator.
Frau Professor Snyder-Körber.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for these lovely readings that I think spoke to each other, and also for really the wonderful discussion. And I have a little bit of an ulterior motive in asking my question, because among other things, I co-direct the Writing Center here at our university, and we've managed to talk Jan into doing a short fiction workshop with our students. But I wondered a little bit, and Colette, that's so wonderful that you mentioned the fact that you were participated in a writing workshop. I was interested a little bit in your thoughts about writing workshops, learning the craft of writing versus doing it on your own. And I know that both of you teach. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, how that intersects with your writing practice development as a writer.
I just, when you were asking that, I've been reading Flannery O'Connor's Mystery and Manners this week, and there's a bit where she's asked, does she think that universities stifle creative writing? And she says, in my opinion, they don't stifle enough writers, in true acidic Flannery O'Connor sense. Every time I read Mystery and Manners, I find something else where I think, Flannery O'Connor was a genius, but oh my goodness, I wouldn't have wanted to have been stuck with her at a dinner party. I think she would have just ripped your skin off. I am going to be really, really honest, and I hope I don't put off any of the students who signed up for my workshops, who I'm really excited about meeting. I have never once in my life ever done a single class on writing, ever. So I've been teaching for like 6 or 7 years without really knowing what I'm doing. Just instinctively. I personally would absolutely hate to sit in a creative writing workshop because I don't really like being told what to do. But I also know for lots and lots of people, they find the space that creates and the boundaries that are created by a workshop and the deadlines and ideas and things that get put across really, really helpful. So Flannery O'Connor also has a great quote where she talks about, teaching creative writing being like teaching the animals at the zoo one at a time, and what's taught by the giraffe one week is undermined by the baboon the next week. There's no right or wrong approach to writing. You find what works for you and you roll with it, and you don't judge other people for what they need to do. I think that's the most freeing piece of advice I can give. I've been hit over the head so many times by much more talented, grounded writers than me saying, like, Jan, you can only write the way you can write. And that's quite liberating to know that you find what works for you and you roll with it.
Maria, Eisenmann has one question. If somebody else has one, you must be really quick because we could have one more. Otherwise, well, never mind. Maria, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, thank you for the fabulous readings and also for the discussion. I want to come back to your texts, whether it's poetry or fiction. It seems to me it is all quite a vivid description, or maybe also a depiction of the cyclical nature of all those traumatic experiences. And I see it that it also has kind of a transgenerational effect. Because it is what I just said, the cyclical nature. I remember one passage in the Fire Starters where you write that the troubles are always written with a capital T, as if it was an event with a beginning and an ending, but we don't have an ending. So my question, do you see a chance to overcome the problems? Do you have any kind of hope to maybe get into solving the problems? Is there well, a glimpse of hope?
Boom, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I guess I've been thinking about this an awful lot this week because I've been writing a paper on magic realism in Northern Ireland, and there's a great quote from the writer Brian Moore, who I'm not sure if people are familiar with Brian Moore's work or not. He was a great Belfast-based writer and one of the only kind of magical realists from Northern Ireland, where he talks about magical realism as belief in an unrealistic principle, kind of, and to me, that's what's required in Northern Ireland. And it's kind of why I am a magical realist writing about Northern Ireland in a way. You have two binary opposed matrices of thought at work in Northern Ireland, and neither side are ever going to be satisfied. There is no kind of solution that makes Northern Ireland make sense. The only thing is the suspension of disbelief and something bigger than that. To me, the Good Friday Agreement is the ultimate suspension of disbelief, that people would choose to go, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. There's no way to reconcile those two things. We have to believe in an almost kind of fantastical principle that we could have peace and we could have a future and we could have hope. That's what I've been thinking, but I don't think there is a way to get a square peg into a round hole here. So one side's always going to be dissatisfied, so there has to almost be something beyond. What that is, I'm not too sure. I do think there's something about what we talked about earlier in the sort of George Saundersification of things, that quite often when we stop seeing the humanity in people who are different from ourselves, there's no starting point. If you can't see someone who's not like you as human and worthy of respect and dignity, we're never going to get anywhere. And so a lot of the solutions that are being bandied about at the minute about how we fix the current problems, they're surface solutions. We need to go right down to, there are young men across Northern Ireland at the minute who are lacking dignity because they don't have jobs or careers to aspire to. They don't have, good housing areas to live in. They don't have perspective. And we need to invest in that, because that's about saying you're human. We want to give you your dignity back. And I think if a lot of those tensions were addressed, we would be able to start to talk a wee bit more rationally about the really complex differences that we have. Was the big thing that really struck me last week when the riots kicked off. We just did not fight hard enough for the last 23 years for integrated education. We shouldn't be sitting right now with, I think we're at like 9.3% or something of the schools are integrated. We should not be sitting at that. And that's down to me. I should have been shouting about that. We're all culpable in that, because that's a big, deep, fundamental thing we could have fixed, and we haven't worked hard enough to do it.
I agree.
Thank you so much for engaging in such detail with such a difficult question. I always tell my students, you can't expect authors to solve all the political problems of this world, but we very often do, right? Especially when they write with such great imagination. Hasman Ayos, unfortunately, I have to ask you to be very brief now, because I've promised the organizers to finish 5 minutes to 9. So not much time on the clock left, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'll try to put it into a little nutshell. So I'm quite interested in questions of representation and identity. And previously we had this topic of, well, being kind of desensitized as you have a sense of overexposure to something. So I was just wondering now in questions of representation and stereotypes, what your opinion is on the use of, or whether you think that stereotypes can be positively used to represent, for example, Northern Irish identity.
Stereotyping is something I'm thinking about a lot at the minute in terms of how we approach depictions of loyalism. I work as a community arts facilitator, and most of my work is working with people who would identify as being from a loyalist background, and 99% of the times when they're depicted on TV, in film, in fiction, it's a stereotype pastiche where the view is, the gaze is we're laughing at them. Now, arguably quite often they do set themselves up to be quite easily laughed at. But I think we're back again to that question of, where is the gaze coming from? Is the gaze starting with a sense of people as human and of worth, or is it looking down at people and making them smaller? So, when you come to stereotype is a very loaded term. To me, it's almost always sounds reductive. That doesn't mean that you shy away from saying the difficult things about a community, like this community has a problem here, or this community quite often has this unhelpful behavior or whatever it is. But it's all about the voice with which you say that, and that you also point to the things that are good about the community. Like last week, whenever the riots were going on, it broke my heart seeing the community leaders, like the good community leaders, that sometimes that can be a kind of byword for paramilitary sometimes in Northern Ireland, but the youth workers and the people who run soccer clubs and things coming and literally standing in the way of the young people to stop them from getting into harm and doing bad things. I was like, that is great stuff about that particular community that needs to be celebrated and held up against the difficult, problematic stuff. So yeah, stereotype, but give us all the stereotypes, the good stereotypes alongside the more negative ones.
Thanks again, and I would like to ask everyone in the audience to switch off their microphones and switch on their microphones and give our two authors a real round of applause and not just virtual hands. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, the three of you, Katharina, Colette and Jan. Now, wouldn't it be lovely to end this event, to end this day by having a glass of wine or a pint of beer together? Well, certainly at one of the next meetings. But at this point, it only remains for me to express my thanks to everyone who made this wonderful launch event so beautiful today. Not only me, but all of our ISWÜ team are completely thrilled by this gorgeous evening. Thank you for all the lovely greetings, the excellent presentations, the delightful music, and the fantastic readings. I think it was a great and a very worthy kick-off event for the ISWÜ.
And can we all say thanks to Maria?
I totally agree. And we hope you liked this event as much as we did. And if you want to leave positive feedback with us, we'll certainly approach you over the next couple of days for testimonials for our website. So finally, it falls to me to close this event. And we hope to see you again at our future lectures and events. Check our website for our newsletter, and bye-bye.